My cheating ex-wife, whom I divorced 2 years ago, contacted me and said her father was sick and wanted to see me. I showed up only for her to introduce her new husband to me. She said, "Good to see you again. Meet my new husband." I turned and I saw the security guy we recently employed in my newly acquired company. So I dropped the bomb and everyone was surprised. "Hi. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel and comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout-out in our next story. Today, our special shout-out goes to Jackson Carter from Nashville. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. The text came through at 3:47 p.m., sharp and cold as a blade against my throat. "Dad's sick. He's asking for you. Please come." Lara's name glowed on my phone screen like a ghost I'd buried 2 years ago, clawing its way back up. I sat there in my penthouse, the city skyline bruising the horizon purple beyond the glass, and felt the old scar tissue twist in my chest. Divorce does that, leaves you raw, even when you think you've cauterized the wound. Her dad, though? Old man Harris had been the one piece of that wreckage I didn't hate. A gruff, decent guy who'd poured me whiskey and called me son, even after Lara torched our marriage with some sleazy coworker. If he was sick, I owed him a goodbye. Against every shred of instinct screaming at me to delete the message and pour another bourbon, I grabbed my keys. The engine of my black Audi growled to life, a low rumble that matched the storm brewing in my gut as I cut through the city. Lara's place was 40 minutes out, some cookie-cutter suburb where the lawns were too green and the secrets too dirty. The whole drive, I wrestled with it. Why now? 2 years of silence, and suddenly she's texting me like we're still family? I told myself it wasn't about her. It was about Harris. But the closer I got, the tighter my knuckles whitened on the wheel. By the time I pulled into her driveway, the sun was bleeding out, casting long shadows across her beige split-level house. The air smelled like cut grass and regret as I stepped out, boots crunching gravel. The front door was cracked open, a sliver of warm light spilling onto the porch. I didn't knock, never liked announcing myself where I wasn't wanted. Inside, the living room hit me with a wave of déjà vu. Same faded floral couch, same cheap cedar candle stench she used to think was classy. But something was off. No hospital bed hum. No antiseptic tang of sickness. Just the murmur of voices and the clink of a glass. Then I saw her, Lara, standing there in the archway to the kitchen, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back tight, like she was still trying to look 25. She hadn't changed. Same sharp cheekbones, same calculating green eyes that used to pin me down. But now, there was a smirk playing on her lips, slow and deliberate, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. "Robert," she said, voice honeyed with venom. "Good of you to show." My jaw tightened. "Where's your dad?" She tilted her head, and that's when I heard it, a gravelly chuckle from behind her. Harris shuffled into view, hale as ever, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "Hey, kid," he said, raising the glass. "Didn't expect you so soon." His eyes crinkled, oblivious, like this was some damn reunion. "Sick." He looked ready to arm wrestle me over the coffee table. The air thickened, my pulse kicking up a notch. I swung my gaze back to Lara, and that smirk widened. "Oh, don't look so sour," she purred. "I've got someone I want you to meet." She stepped aside, and there he was, Nate. A wiry guy, late 20s, with a mop of dark hair and a nervous twitch in his shoulders. He was in jeans and a flannel, but I'd seen him before. That cheap polyester uniform, the badge clipped to his chest. Horizon Freight. My Horizon Freight. The security guard I'd hired 3 weeks ago to watch the loading docks. "Robert, meet my husband," Lara said, dragging out the word like it was a trophy she'd polished just for me. Nate shifted, his Adam's apple bobbing as he stuck out a hand. Hey, Mr. Caldwell. Good to, see you." "Husband." The word landed like a sucker punch, but I didn't flinch. 2 years ago, she'd shredded our vows with some pencil-necked accountant. Now she'd upgraded to my own employee? The gall of it almost made me laugh. Almost. I ignored Nate's hand, letting it hang there like a dead fish, and locked eyes with Lara. She wanted me to crack, wanted the old Robert who'd shout, who'd let her drag him into the mud. But I wasn't that guy anymore. "You dragged me out here for this?" My voice was low, steady, a wire pulled taut. What's the play, Laura? Humiliate me? Prove you've still got a pulse. Her laugh was sharp, a blade slicing the tension. Oh, come on. I thought you'd want to know who's keeping your ex warm at night. Mate's been telling me all about Horizon Freight. Long hours, huh? Must be tough, running a little kingdom like that. That's when it clicked. She didn't know. She had no idea I'd bought Horizon Freight 6 months back, buried the ownership under a shell company so clean even the IRS couldn't sniff it out. Laura thought she was jabbing me with a stick, oblivious she'd been on my payroll, crunching numbers in my accounting department. The irony was so thick I could taste it, metallic, bitter, delicious. I slid my hand into my jacket pocket, fingers brushing the envelope I'd brought. Call it instinct, call it paranoia. I'd carried it since Angela, my COO, flagged Lara's name on the employee roster last week. Termination letter, signed and dated. I'd planned to mail it, keep it impersonal. But this was better. Long hours, yeah, I said, stepping closer, my shadow falling over her. Keeps me busy. Keeps everyone busy. I pulled the envelope out, slow, letting the moment stretch. Her eyes flicked to it, confusion creasing her brow. Mate coughed, shifting like a kid caught sneaking cookies. What's that? She asked, voice losing a shade of its swagger. I held it out, plain white, her name scrawled in black ink. Open it. She snatched it, tearing the flap with a flick of her nail. The paper rustled as she unfolded it, and I watched the color drain from her face. Her lips parted, a silent gasp, as the words sank in. Termination of employment. Effective immediately. She looked up, eyes wide, then back down, like she could will it away. What the hell is this? She snapped, voice pitching up. I leaned in, close enough to smell her floral perfume, and dropped my voice to a growl. Surprise cuts both ways. Laura, you've been working for me, and now you're not. Her mouth worked soundlessly, a fish flopping on dry land. Nate stammered. Wait, you own Horizon Freight? Harris coughed into his whiskey, muttering, well, damn. I turned, boots thudding on the hardwood, and made for the door. Lara's shock shattered behind me, splintering into rage. Robert, you son of a bitch, get back here. Her voice chased me out, shrill and unraveling, but I didn't look back. The cool evening air hit my face as I slid into my car, the engine roaring awake. I peeled out, gravel spitting under the tires, and let the adrenaline flood my veins. She thought she'd ambushed me, thought she could parade her new life and watch me bleed. But I'd flipped the board, and now she was the one scrambling. This wasn't over. Laura didn't fold that easy. But tonight, I owned her defeat. And it felt damn good. The next morning hit like a hangover without the liquor. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Freight's office, 16 stories up. The city sprawled below me like a chessboard I'd learned to play blind. The glass was cool against my knuckles, a faint hum of traffic bleeding through the panes. Inside, the office buzzed, phones trilling, keyboards clacking, the low murmur of suits and ties pretending it was just another day. But it wasn't. The air had a charge, a static crackle you could feel in your teeth. Word of Lara's firing had spread faster than spilled coffee on a white shirt, and now every eye in the place was sizing me up. I'd walked in at 8:03 a.m., black coffee in hand, my boots still carrying the dust of her driveway. The whispers started before I hit the elevator. Caldwell canned his ex-wife. Heard she didn't even know he owned the place. Guy's got ice in his veins. By the time I reached my corner office, the split was clear. Half the staff thought I was a bastard, a ruthless king swinging his scepter just because he could. The other half? They nodded my way with tight-lipped respect, like I just won a cage fight. I didn't care what they thought. Not really. But the weight of it clung to me, a shadow I couldn't shake. Angela found me staring out that window, her heels clicking sharp against the polished concrete floor. My COO, 5'4", dark hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, as that could spot a lie from across the room. She'd been with me since the early days, back when Horizon was just a pipe dream and I was still licking wounds from Lara's betrayal. She dropped a stack of reports on my desk, the thud heavy enough to pull me out of my head. You're trending downstairs, she said, voice dry as a desert wind. Lara's the martyr of the break room. They're saying you humiliated her for sport. I turned, leaning against the glass, the cold seeping into my back. She ambushed me, Angela. Paraded her new husband like a damn trophy. I just evened the score. Angela arched a brow, crossing her arms. Evened it? Robert, You dropped a nuke. She's not some random accountant. She's your ex. People talk. And Laura? She doesn't strike me as the type to slink off. Quietly. The word hung there, a warning wrapped in velvet. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness grounding me. Angela was right. Laura wasn't built for surrender. That smirk from last night, the way her voice cracked into rage as I walked out, it wasn't defeat. It was fuel. I could still hear her shouting after me, "You son of a bitch." The sound echoed in my skull, a ghost rattling its chains. "She'll get over it," I said, but the words felt hollow even to me. Angela didn't buy it either. She just shook her head and tapped the reports. "Numbers don't care about your vendetta. Focus. We've got a shipment backlog to clear." She paused at the door, glancing back. "Just don't say I didn't warn you." The rest of the day was a blur: meetings, calls, the grind of keeping Horizon Freight's gears turning. But Lara's shadow loomed. Every sidelong glance from an employee, every hushed conversation that cut off when I walked by, it was her, worming her way back into my world. By 6 p.m., the office had emptied out, leaving me alone with the hum of the HVAC and a skyline turning blood red. I poured a bourbon from the bottle stashed in my desk, the amber liquid glinting like liquid fire, and let my mind drift. 2 years ago, I'd come home early from a business trip, Chicago, a deal that put my first $1 million in the bank. The house was dark, quiet, except for the creak of the stairs. I found her in our bed, tangled with some sweaty nobody from her office, his tie still looped around his neck like a leash. The memory burned, her gasp, his stammered excuses, the way I didn't yell, just walked out and never looked back. Divorce papers hit her desk a week later. I thought I'd buried it, built an empire over the grave. But last night ripped the lid off, and now I was choking on the dirt. Had I gone too far? Firing her wasn't just business, it was personal, a blade I twisted because I could. The bourbon stung my throat, and I wondered if the taste of victory was worth the afterburn. Maybe I should have mailed the letter, kept it clean. But no, Laura wanted to fight. She'd thrown the first punch. I just hit back harder. Meanwhile, across town, I didn't need to see her to know what was happening. Lara's house would be a war zone by now. Dishes clattering, her voice slicing through the walls. I could picture Nate, that twitchy kid, hunched on their sagging couch, taking the brunt of it. She'd be pacing, barefoot on that ugly rug, her nails digging into her palms as she unloaded. "You didn't even defend me," she'd snap, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. "He fires me in my own damn house, and you just stand there like a coward." Nate would mumble something. Sorry, maybe, or what was I supposed to do? But it wouldn't matter. Laura wasn't hearing him. She'd be spiraling, her mind already spinning webs. "He thinks he's untouchable," she'd say, voice dropping low, a promise coiled in every syllable. "I'll show him." And Nate? He'd nod, not because he agreed, but because he didn't know how to say no. Back at Horizon, he'd already started moving. I wouldn't know it yet, not till later. But that night, while I nursed my bourbon, Nate slipped into the security office. The fluorescence buzzed overhead as he punched in his code, the monitor flickering to life. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard, guilt gnawing at him, but Lara's words echoed louder. He pulled up the logs, entry scans, camera feeds, anything he could use. Leverage. A way to hit me where it hurt. He didn't want to. He liked the job, liked the steady paycheck, but Laura had her hooks in him, and he was too green to shake free. I didn't hear the click of his mouse, didn't see the sweat beading on his brow. All I had was the bourbon and the silence, my penthouse a fortress of glass and steel. I stood at the window again, the city lights pulsing like a heartbeat, and felt the storm coming. Laura wasn't done. She'd never been done. And me? I'd lit the fuse last night, walked away with a smirk while it burned. Now it was a race. Who'd blow up first? I drained the glass, the burn steadying me, and set it down with a clink. Let her come. I built this empire brick by brick, clawed my way out of her mess. If she wanted war, I'd give her one. But deep down, beneath the steel and the swagger, a whisper gnawed at me. What if she's not the only one who burns? A week after I dropped the hammer on Laura, the world felt like it was tilting, just a hair, but enough to throw off my balance. I'd built Horizon Freight into a machine, sleek and relentless, but now there was a hitch in the gears, a faint grind I couldn't pinpoint. It started Monday, in the back offices where the air smelled like stale coffee and toner dust. I was flipping through ledgers, old habit, keeping my hands dirty even when I didn't need to, when the numbers stared back wrong. Small amounts, $50 here, 100 there, missing from petty cash over months. Not enough to sink us, but enough to itch under my skin like a splinter. I called Angela into my office, the door clicking shut behind her. The city skyline loomed gray through the glass, rain streaking down in lazy rivulets, matching the churn in my gut. "Look at this," I said, sliding the ledger across my desk. "Someone's been skimming." She frowned, her sharp eyes scanning the pages, fingers tapping a rhythm on the wood. "Could be clerical error. Or someone's got sticky hands. I'll trace it. Give me a day." "Do it quiet," I told her, voice low. "No one knows but us." Angela nodded, but her glance lingered, like she could see the cracks I was hiding. "You okay, Robert? You've been off since the Laura thing." I leaned back, chair creaking, and forced a smirk. "I'm fine. She's a ghost. Rattling chains doesn't scare me." She didn't push, just scooped up the ledger and left me with the rain and a gnawing thought. Laura. It couldn't be coincidence. Not after I torched her little victory lap. She was out there, plotting, and now my own books were whispering betrayal. I rubbed my jaw, stubble rasping under my fingers, and told myself it was nothing. I doubled down, fired her, owned the moment. I wasn't about to let her rattle me now. But she was moving. Across town, in that cluttered cave she called an apartment, Laura was a storm tearing itself apart. I didn't need to be there to see it. The scene played out in my head like a film I'd watched too many times. Her coffee table would be a mess of crumpled takeout bags and wine-stained glasses, the air thick with cigarette smoke she swore she'd quit. She'd be hunched over her laptop, blonde hair falling in greasy strands, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and too much spite. Papers, bank statements, news clippings, anything she could scrape up would be scattered like shrapnel, her fingers stabbing at keys as she hunted me. She'd started with Horizon Freight's sale. I'd bought it cheap 6 months back. A steal after the previous owner, some schmuck named Grayson, tanked it into bankruptcy. Laura smelled blood, thought I'd bent rules, greased palms, something dirty to snag it for pennies. She wasn't wrong to wonder. The deal had been a tightrope, legal, but sharp-edged, the kind that left whispers if you looked too close. I'd buried it deep, layers of shell companies and NDAs, but Laura was a digger. Always had been. She'd claw through hell if it meant dragging me down with her. Found it, she'd mutter to herself, voice hoarse, a predator catching a scent. Some article from a trade rag, Grayson Logistics collapses, sold to mystery buyer, and a fuzzy photo of me shaking hands at a gala last year. She'd cross-reference dates, filings, anything to stitch a noose. Her laugh would be bitter, triumphant, echoing off those peeling walls. "You bastard," she'd hiss. "You bastard." Nate was her shadow in that chaos, perched on the edge of their sagging couch, his knee bouncing like a junkie's. He'd watch her, that mop of dark hair falling into his eyes, and feel the leash tighten. "Lar, maybe we should just," he'd start, but she'd cut him off, whipping around with a glare that could shatter glass. "Just what, Nate? Let him win?" "He fired me in my own house. You think I'm gonna roll over?" Her voice would climb, shrill and jagged, and he'd shrink back, hands raised like he could ward off the venom. That night. Wednesday, I think, he cracked. She'd sent him back to Horizon Freight, his security badge dangling from his belt like a guilty secret. The office was a tomb after hours, fluorescents buzzing overhead, casting long shadows down the halls. He slipped into the security room, the door whispering shut behind him, and punched in his code. The monitor flickered, blue light washing over his sweaty face as he scrolled through logs, entry scans, camera feeds, file access records. His breath hitched, fingers trembling over the keys. He didn't want this, didn't want to be her weapon, but her voice was in his head, relentless. "Find something, Nate. Anything." He found a folder, digital, buried in a subdrive, acquisition docs. Password protected, but he had the override code from training. Dumb luck or sloppy IT, didn't matter. He clicked, and there it was, contracts, emails, a trail of how I'd scooped Horizon from the ashes. Nothing illegal, not quite, but murky enough to raise eyebrows. Nate swallowed hard, his pulse thudding in his ears. What if he's not the only one hiding something? He'd mutter, glancing at the door like I'd burst through any second. Back at my penthouse, I didn't know he was there. Not yet. Thursday night, I stood at my window again, bourbon in hand, the city a smear of neon and rain. Angela's call came late. Her voice clipped through the line. "It's Laura," she said. "The missing cash, her initials on the receipts. She's been skimming since she started." The glass froze halfway to my lips. "You sure?" "100%. I've got the paper trail. What do you want to do?" I set the drink down, the clink loud in the silence. "Sit on it. We'll use it when the time's right." She hesitated. "Robert, if she's poking around, she won't find anything," I snapped, sharper than I meant. I covered my tracks. But as I hung up, the rain drummed harder, a rhythm that matched the doubt creeping in. Laura wasn't just rattling chains now, she was swinging a wrecking ball. And Nate? That kid was in over his head, a pawn she'd sacrifice without blinking. I paced my hardwood floor, boots thudding, and felt the walls close in. The acquisition was clean, mostly. I'd danced on the edge, sure, but I'd won. Hadn't I? Friday morning, I walked into Horizon Freight like nothing was wrong, my jaw set, I scanning every face. The back offices hummed, oblivious, but I felt her, Laura, out there, digging, clawing. And now I had her theft in my pocket, a loaded gun waiting for the trigger. She thought she could unnerve me, thought she could topple my tower. But I'd built this with blood and steel, and I wasn't about to let her, or anyone, bring it down. Still, as I sank into my chair, the ledger's missing sums burned in my mind. She'd stolen from me petty, desperate, and now she was hunting bigger game. The game was on, and we were both circling, knives out. I wouldn't flinch. I couldn't. But deep down, a whisper slithered through the cracks. What if she's closer than you think? Midday sun sliced through the blinds of the diner, a greasy joint called Rudy's off Route 17, halfway between Lara's suburban purgatory and my steel and glass kingdom. The place smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil, the kind of spot where the booths were sticky and the jukebox hadn't worked since Reagan was in office. Neutral ground, she'd called it in her text, short, clipped, no room for negotiation. Noon. Rudy's. We talk. I'd almost laughed. Talk? Laura didn't talk. She stabbed. But I went anyway, boots heavy on the cracked linoleum, because ignoring her now was like ignoring a rattlesnake in your bed. I slid into the booth at 11:58, the red vinyl creaking under me, my coffee black and bitter as the week I'd had. The bell above the door jangled, and there she was, Laura, striding in like she owned the place, her green eyes glinting with something feral. Nate trailed behind, a shadow in flannel, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he'd rather be anywhere else. She didn't sit right away, stood there, looming, letting the moment stretch. I didn't flinch, just met her gaze, steady as stone. "You've been busy," she said, voice low, a blade wrapped in silk. She dropped a manila folder on the table, the slap loud enough to turn heads from the counter. "Thought you'd want to see this before it hits the papers." I didn't touch it. "Not yet. Sit down, Laura. You're blocking my light." Her lips twitched, a smirk that didn't reach her eyes, and she slid in across from me. Nate hesitated, then perched beside her, his knee bouncing under the table. He wouldn't look at me, kept his eyes on the salt shaker like it held the meaning of life. I leaned back, arms crossed, and waited. She wanted me to beg for it. I wouldn't. "Go ahead," I said. "Impress me." She flipped the folder open, slow, deliberate, like a dealer showing a winning hand. Papers spilled out, photocopies, printouts, a grainy shot of me at that gala last year, shaking Grayson's hand before his company went belly up. "Horizon Freight," she started, tapping a nail on the top sheet. "Bought dirt cheap after Grayson tanked. Funny thing, bankruptcy filings say he was solvent till 6 months before you swooped in. Then poof, gone. Smells like you pushed him over the edge, Robert. Rigged the game." My pulse kicked, but my face stayed granite. She wasn't wrong to dig Grayson's collapse had been a domino I'd nudged, not toppled. A quiet word here, a delayed payment there, enough to tip him without breaking loss. Legal, barely, but the kind of move that'd spark headlines and audits if it got out. I'd buried it under layers of paperwork, thought it airtight. Laura had found a seam. "What do you want?" I asked, voice flat, like we were discussing the weather. She leaned in, elbows on the table, her perfume cutting through the diner stink. "Floral, sharp, same as always. My job back. And 50 grand. Cash. You've got till Friday, or this, She tapped the folder again. Goes to every news outlet in the state. Local tycoon sinks rival, steals empire. How's that sound? Inside, my gut twisted, a cold sweat prickling my neck. 50 grand was pocket change, but the job? Letting her back into Horizon Freight was like inviting a fox into the henhouse. And the leak? Christ, it had dragged me through the mud, maybe worse. Investigators loved a whiff of dirt, even if it didn't stick. I could see the headlines now, my name smeared across every screen. But I didn't blink, didn't let her see the jolt. You think this scares me? I said, voice a low growl. You've always overestimated your hand, Laura. Her smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat, then hardened. Friday, she snapped, shoving the folder toward me. Think it over. She stood, brushing imaginary lint off her jeans, and jerked her head at Nate. Let's go. Nate lingered, finally meeting my eyes. His were wide, guilty, a kid caught in a riptide. Mr. Caldwell, he started, but Laura grabbed his arm, yanking him out of the booth. The bell jangled again as they left, her heels clicking a war drum on the floor. I sat there, coffee cooling, the folder staring up at me like a loaded gun. I didn't open it, not there. Stuffed it in my jacket and walked out, the sun too bright, the air too thick. Back at Horizon Freight, the office hummed oblivious, but I felt the weight of her threat in every step. Angela was waiting in my office, perched on the edge of my desk, her tablet glowing with data. Got it, she said as I shut the door. Lara's skim, 6 months, clean as a whistle till you look close. Forged receipts, fake vendor codes. She's good, but I'm better. I sank into my chair, the leather groaning, and rubbed my temples. How much? 8 grand, give or take. Enough to nail her if we press it. 8 grand. Pennies compared to her demand, but gold in a fight. My mind raced, gears clicking into place. Laura thought she had me cornered, thought I'd bend under her little blackmail scheme. She didn't know I'd been building my own cage for her, piece by piece. Pull everything, I said, voice steadying. Receipts, logs, timestamps. I wanted ironclad. Angela tilted her head. You're flipping it. Damn right I am. She's blind. Thinks she's holding aces. Let's deal her out. She nodded, a flicker of a smile, and left me with the quiet. I pulled the folder from my jacket, spread it across the desk. Lara's work was sloppy but sharp, enough to sting, not enough to kill. I could weather it, maybe, if it leaked. Pay a lawyer, spin the story. But why let her draw blood when I could slit her throat first? Metaphorically, of course. The bourbon bottle called from my drawer, but I ignored it, fingers drumming the desk instead. Lara's confidence was her blind spot. She'd strutted into that diner like a queen, Nate her reluctant knight, oblivious to the trap closing. 8 grand of theft, petty, reckless, hers. I'd call her bluff, turn her weapon into mine. Friday she'd said, fine. I'd give her a meeting she wouldn't forget. I stood, paced to the window, the city a blur of steel and ambition. My empire, built from the ashes of her betrayal. She thought she could shake it, thought 50 grand and a job would buy her back in. But I wasn't the Robert she'd cheated on, not anymore. The man she'd burned had died in that bedroom 2 years ago, replaced by this one. Harder, colder, smarter. Still, as the rain started again, tapping the glass like a warning, a sliver of doubt wormed in. What if she pushed harder? What if Nate cracked, spilled more than he should? I shoved it down, locked it tight. Laura was a storm, but I was the fortress, and I'd be damned if she brought me down. The clock on my desk ticked past 6 p.m., the sky outside my corner office bruising purple as the city lights flickered awake. Horizon Freight was a ghost town this late, cubicles dark, halls silent, just the hum of the HVAC whispering through the vents. I'd picked the hour deliberate, no witnesses, no interruptions. The stage was mine, and Laura was walking into it blind. I stood by the window, hands clasped behind me, the glass cool against my reflection, a man carved from shadow, waiting to strike. The text I'd sent was simple, 6:30. My office. Let's settle this. No threats, no bait, just enough rope for her to hang herself. The folder of her blackmail sat on my desk, next to Angela's dossier, bank records, forged receipts, timestamps of her petty theft, 8 grand siphoned from my company like a leech. It was locked and loaded, a bullet with her name on it. I'd played her game at the diner, let her think she had me on the ropes. Now? Now I'd pull the rug out and watch her fall. The elevator dinged down the hall at 6:28, a faint chime cutting the stillness. Footsteps followed, her heels sharp and staccato, his softer, shuffling. Laura swept in first, chin high, blonde hair pulled tight like a warrior's helm. She wore a black blazer, too crisp for her, like she'd dressed for a power play. Nate trailed behind, flannel rumpled, eyes darting like a cornered animal. The air shifted, thick with her perfume and his sweat, as they stopped in front of my desk. "You're early," I said, turning slow, voice a low rumble. "Eager to lose?" Lara's smirk was instant, a flash of teeth. "Cute, Robert. But I'm not here to play. 50 grand in my job, or your dirty laundry airs by Monday." Clock's ticking. I let the silence stretch, leaning against the window frame, arms crossed. Her confidence was a mask, polished, but I could see the cracks. Nate shifted, his boots scuffing the carpet, avoiding my gaze again. Poor bastard looked like he'd rather bolt than breathe. I nodded at the chairs. "Sit." She didn't. Just crossed her arms, mirroring me, a standoff in the dim light. "I'll stand. Let's make this quick. Where's my money?" I stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the thud of my boots echoing off the walls. "You think you've got me pinned," I said, circling the desk, picking up Angela's dossier. "Think a few papers and a loud mouth can shake me down. But here's the thing, Laura, you've never known when to fold." Her eyes flicked to the file in my hand, a flicker of doubt, but she doubled down. "Don't bluff me, Robert. I've got proof, Grayson, the bankruptcy, your greasy little fingerprints. You're not as clean as you think." I stopped, inches from her, close enough to feel the heat of her defiance. "Proof." I flipped the dossier open, letting the pages fan out, bank statements, receipts, her initials scrawled in red ink. "How's this for proof?" 8 grand, Laura. 8 grand you stole from Horizon Freight. Right under my nose. Her smirk froze, then melted, eyes widening as she snatched the file. She scanned it, breath hitching, fingers trembling on the edges. This is bullshit," she stammered, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. "You faked this." "Faked it." I stepped closer, towering now, my shadow swallowing her. "Timestamps don't lie. Neither do security logs. You've been skimming since day one, petty, sloppy, desperate. I could have you in cuffs by morning. Fraud. Embezzlement. Pick your poison." She stumbled back, bumping Nate, who flinched like he'd been shocked. "You're lying," she spat. But it was weaker now, a cornered animal bearing teeth. "You wouldn't dare, wouldn't I?" I cut in, voice cold as steel. "Back off, Laura. Drop your little crusade, or I press charges. You'll be lucky to see daylight before you're 40. Her defiance shattered, splintering into rage. "You bastard," she screamed, hurling the dossier at me. Papers fluttered like wounded birds, scattering across the floor. "You think you can bury me? I'll ruin you. I'll..." "Enough." Nate's voice cracked the air, sharp and sudden, stopping her mid-tirade. He grabbed her arm, yanking her back, his face pale but set. "Stop it, Laura. Just stop." She whirled on him, eyes blazing. "What the hell are you? You're the one who's been lying," he shouted, cutting her off, his words raw, jagged. "To both of us. You dragged me into this. Made me dig, made me betray him. And for what? Your damn revenge? I'm done." The room froze, a heartbeat of silence so thick it choked. Laura gaped at him, mouth working soundlessly, then turned back to me, fury twisting her features. "You turned him against me," she hissed, low and venomous. "You..." "No," Nate said, stepping away, hands raised. "You did that." He looked at me, finally, eyes heavy with shame. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm sorry. I didn't want this." Then he turned, boots scuffing, and walked out, the door thudding shut behind him. Laura stood there, chest heaving, a queen dethroned. "This isn't over," she snarled, voice trembling with the last scraps of her fight. "You'll regret this." She stormed out, heels stabbing the floor, leaving a wake of scattered papers and broken pride. I sank into my chair, the leather creaking, and let the silence settle. My pulse hammered, a war drum in my ears, but it was over. I'd won. The evidence, hers, mine, lay in ruins around me, a battlefield of ink and intent. She'd swung hard, and I'd swung harder. But the victory tasted flat, like ash on my tongue. I'd crushed her, sure, but at what cost? The bourbon bottle gleamed from the drawer, tempting, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. The door creaked open, and Angela slipped in, her silhouette sharp against the hall light. She surveyed the mess, papers, tension, me, and gave a knowing nod. "You okay?" she asked, voice soft but steady. I exhaled, long and slow, rubbing a hand over my face. "Yeah, it's done." She lingered, then tapped the desk. "Good. Clean this up tomorrow. Go home." She left, her footsteps fading, and I was alone again. The city glowed beyond the glass, a million lives oblivious to the war I just fought. Laura was gone, beaten, but her vow echoed, not over. Maybe it wasn't. She'd lick her wounds, come back swinging someday. But tonight? Tonight, I'd broken her. Nate, too, in a way, freed him, maybe, from her claws. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, drained to the bone. Victorious, yeah, but hollowed out, like a fortress after a siege. The clock ticked on, relentless. I'd survived her ambush, her blackmail, her hate. But as the shadows lengthened, a whisper lingered, "What's left when the fight's all you've got?" 3 months after I burned Lara's last bridge, the air in my penthouse felt lighter, like the ghost of her venom had finally drifted out the cracks. I stood at the window, the city a sprawl of steel and neon below, my breath fogging the glass as October's chill seeped in. Horizon Freight was gone, sold off in a clean deal to a logistics outfit out of Boston. The papers had been signed 2 weeks ago, ink still fresh when the wire hit my account. 16 million, a fat stack of zeros that felt more like a shedding skin than a trophy. I built that company from grit and spite, a fortress against her betrayal. But now it was ballast I didn't need. The sale wasn't impulsive. After that night in my office, paper strewn, her heels echoing out, Nate's apology hanging in the air, I'd sat with the wreckage and felt the weight. Victory, sure, but it was hollow, a crown too heavy for the king I'd become. Angela saw it first, over coffee in the break room a week later. "You're done with it, aren't you?" she'd said, stirring sugar into her mug, her eyes sharp as ever. I'd nodded, no words needed. She'd grinned, rare and real. "Good. Build something new. You're better at starting than holding." So I did. The profits seeded a new venture. Calder Enterprises, a lean operation in renewable tech, solar rigs and wind farms, something that didn't reek of diesel and old grudges. I'd hired a skeleton crew, poached a few Horizon vets, and set up shop in a converted warehouse downtown. No corner office yet, just a desk by a window, blueprints pinned to the wall, and a hum of possibility I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about breathing. That night, I traded the penthouse's sterile quiet for a different kind of peace. My old man's place was a squat brownstone on the city's edge, the kind with creaky stairs and a front door that stuck. Dad, Jack Caldwell, retired accountant, widower since I was 10, hadn't seen me in months, not since the divorce turned me into a ghost. I'd called him out of the blue, voice rougher than I meant. "Dinner." He'd grunted a yes, surprised but not prying. That was his way. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and thyme, a throwback to Sundays before Mom died. He shuffled in, apron smeared with gravy, his gray hair thinner than I remembered, but his grip firm when he clapped my shoulder. "You look like hell," he said, pouring me a beer, the bottle clinking against the counter. "Feel like it too." I shot back, smirking as I took the glass. We sat at his scarred oak table, plates piled high, the clatter of forks filling the gaps. He didn't ask about Laura, didn't need to. The papers had splashed her firing, my sale, enough dots for him to connect. Instead, he talked numbers, old habits, quizzing me on Calder's margins like I was still a kid with a lemonade stand. "You're starting over," he said finally, setting his fork down, eyes steady on mine. "That takes guts." I swallowed, the beer cold in my throat. Had to. Horizon was her. Too much baggage. He nodded, slow, like he'd been waiting for that. "I was hard on you, after she left. Thought you'd buckle. You didn't." His voice cracked, just a hair, and I saw it, the pride he'd never say loud. "You're tougher than I was." I looked away, the weight of that hitting harder than I expected. Took a while to figure out tough doesn't mean alone. Dinner stretched late. The silence is comfortable. The roast picked clean. When I left, he hugged me quick, gruff, but real, and I drove back with the windows down, the night air sharp against my skin. We weren't fixed, not fully, but the rift I'd let fester was closing. Peace wasn't loud, I realized. It was this, quiet, steady, a thread pulling tight. A week later, I was at Brew and Bolt, a coffee shop 2 blocks from the warehouse. The place was a hipster dive, exposed brick, jazz humming low, baristas with tattoos and attitude. I'd taken to stopping there, black coffee in hand, watching the world spin while I sketched plans on napkins. That morning, steam curled from my mug, the bitter roast grounding me as I flipped through a vendor contract. The bell above the door chimed, and I glanced up, habit, not curiosity. Nate stood there, not in flannel but a black polo, a bouncer's badge clipped to his chest. He was broader now, hair clipped short, scanning the room for trouble that wasn't there. Our eyes locked, just for a second, and he gave a tight nod, respect, not fear. No Laura in sight, no shadow of her claws. I smirked, a flicker of something like relief, and nodded back. He moved on, posting up by the door, arms crossed, a man who'd found his footing. I didn't know where she'd gone, jail, another city, another sucker's bed. Didn't care. The last I'd heard, she tried hawking her story to a tabloid, but it flopped, no proof, just a scorned ex's rant. Nate's exit that night had gutted her more than I ever could. She'd lost her pawn, her pride, her grip. Good riddance. I finished my coffee, the mug clinking as I set it down, and tossed a tin on the counter. The barista, pierced lip, green hair, grinned. See ya, boss. I tipped my head and stepped out, the city hitting me full force. Horns blaring, pavement slick with morning dew, a pulse I could feel in my bones. My boots thudded on the sidewalk, steady, sure, as I headed for the warehouse. Calder's sign was up now, stark white letters on black steel, a beacon of what I'd carved from the ashes. Standing there, hands in my pockets, I let the thought settle. Some empires are worth letting go. Horizon had been my cage, forged from her betrayal, a monument to a fight I didn't need to keep waging. I'd sold it, not out of weakness, but strength cut the chains, walked free. Lara's ghost was gone. Nate was his own man. And my dad's gruff, "You're tougher," echoed louder than her threats ever had. The wind kicked up, tugging at my jacket, and I smirked into it. Calder wasn't just a business, it was a horizon, wide open, mine to chase. No looking back. I turned the corner, the city roaring around me, and stepped into whatever came next. The city buzzed around me as I walked away from Brew and Bolt, Calder's sign glinting in the corner of my eye, a new horizon, a fresh fight. But this story? It's yours now too. You've stuck with me through the mud, the betrayal, the wins that don't feel like wins till you shake off the dirt. So what's next? Hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from. More battles, more stakes, all raw and real. Drop a comment. Tell me what you'd do if Laura showed up at your door, or if you'd cut Nate loose sooner. Share this with someone who gets it, someone who knows what it's like to build something from nothing and watch it burn. Stay in the game. I'm not done yet, and neither are you. See you soon.